In the pursuit of the perfect shot, people sometimes forget about the risk that is literally right under their feet. The mere desire to take a cool photo can be the last step, and instead of a vivid memory, only a tragedy remains. This video features 5 stories where the line between the search for impressions and danger was too thin. Enjoy the video. A cold October evening was descending on Brooklyn when 28-year-old Kate Wallace exited the subway at the Marcy Avenue station and walked deep into the industrial district. She worked at a marketing agency, but her real pleasure came in night photography, long exposures, city silhouettes, bridge lines glowing in the dark. Her social media account was slowly growing, and that night she decided to shoot a shot that she thought would take her work to the next level. The abandoned warehouse near the waterfront was a popular spot for local photographers. Concrete floors, graffiti, dilapidated technical rooms, and most importantly, the view of Manhattan that opened from the upper level. Formally, it was forbidden to go there, but the fence had a gap, so for those who were stubbornly looking for a unique angle, it was not an obstacle. Kate wasn't a roofer and wasn't looking for extreme sports. She just wanted silence, height, and city lights. She walked through the broken chain and up the dark stairs, lighting her way with her phone flashlight. The wind carried the smell of damp concrete and rust, and loose sheets of metal rattled somewhere. The roof greeted her with semi-darkness. Only a distant beam of the flashlight touched the corners where the ventilation systems had once worked. In the center of the roof were the remains of old pallets, pieces of rebar, and wet spots from the recent rain. Kate carefully walked to the edge where she could see the view of Manhattan at night. The glass towers glowed softly and unevenly, and the Williamsburg Bridge seemed to illuminate a separate scene for her. She set up a tripod, checked the shutter speed, changed the lens, and took a few test shots. The view was almost perfect, but she wanted a slightly lower angle so that the roofline would enter the frame more evenly. To do this, she had to go one step further. Kate crouched down, moved the tripod a few centimeters, and stepped forward, holding the camera in her hands. At that moment, a thin crunch sounded under her left foot. She didn't even have time to look up. The edge of the concrete slab, which had been corroded by moisture for decades, collapsed under her weight. Kate plummeted down almost without a sound, just a short breath and the rustling of the debris that followed. The fall lasted a few seconds, but it was enough. She flew into an old technical span where ventilation equipment used to work. A neighbor who was walking his dog nearby heard a dull thud and the clang of metal. He stopped, looked into the darkness of the warehouse, but did not understand where the sound came from. It was only when teenagers passed by a few hours later and saw the light of a phone flashing below that the police were called. Rescuers found Kate between metal structures, on the concrete covered with debris at the edge of the roof. She still had the camera in her hands, the screen was broken, but the lens was intact. The last picture she remembered was a long exposure shot of the city, the light lines of the bridge, the fuzzy horizon, and the dark strip of roof from which she took her last step. The end of March in Arizona already resembled summer. Dry air, warm winds, and skies so clear they looked painted. It was then that 20-year-old student Thomas Gray, who was studying communications in Flagstaff, decided to travel to Sedona to capture some spectacular shots for his small but ambitious photoblog. Thomas loved the outdoors, but he also loved taking risks, and most importantly, the feeling that he was doing something a little more daring than others. His friends joked that he was always looking for a place where he hadn't gone before, but in reality, Thomas was going where he had gone, but not with much confidence. In Sedona, this place is easy to find, a rock arch popular with hikers, photographers, and those who want to look like they're standing on the edge of the world in their pictures. Arriving at the trailhead early in the morning, Thomas took his backpack, camera, tripod, and a bottle of water. The trail was not difficult, but it went up in a serpentine manner, sometimes passing next to a steep slope. Already halfway up, He stopped to check the light. The sun was rising quickly, and the contrast between the shadow of the canyon and the bright rocks was becoming sharper. He wanted to capture not just a photo, but a movement, a leap, a moment that seemed to hang between heaven and earth. He had long wanted to take such a shot on the arch, and that day, he felt it was time. When Thomas reached the top, there were already several tourists there. Two girls were taking pictures of each other, standing closer to the base of the arch, but no one risked going to the narrowest part. The wind gusts were stronger than expected, and occasionally kicked up clouds of dust. Thomas said hello, examined the surface of the natural bridge, and thought that everything looked much more stable than the reviews had said. He set up the tripod on a stone patch, set the timer, and walked back and forth several times, checking the angle. The first shots were good, but he wanted more, a moment in the air when the body seems to be hanging and the endless canyon stretches in the background. Thomas moved a little further to the center of the arch, took a deep breath, and tried a light jump to feel the distance. The camera clicked, but he could see from the shadows that the pose didn't turn out as he wanted. The girls waiting for their turn looked at him with concern. One of them said that he had better be careful, as the wind gusts had become sharper in recent days. Thomas smiled and replied that everything was under control. In fact, the wind was throwing off his balance more than he wanted to admit. He set the timer again, walked a few meters away, and began to accelerate for the final jump. Everything was supposed to be fast: 3 steps, a push, a hover in the air, and a landing. But a moment before the push, a strong gust of wind hit him from the side, forcing him to instinctively change his foot position. The jump was uneven, his body went forward, but his center of gravity shifted to the left. His foot, which was supposed to hit the stone when he landed, slipped on the smooth surface of the arch. Thomas threw his arms out in an attempt to regain his balance, but instead lost it completely. Without a single scream, he slid off the arch as if someone had turned off gravity for 1 second and then turned it back on with renewed vigor. The girls froze, and the camera continued to count down the seconds of the timer, filming the still scene. Thomas fell into the dry canyon bed, about 22 meters below. One of the tourists immediately called the rescuers, but they arrived after it was all over. His injuries were incompatible with life. When the rescuers picked up his backpack, they found the last shot in his camera pocket, a failed jump, cut off in mid-jump, where the body was already slightly tilted to the side, but not yet falling. A moment that lasted only a split second, but became fatal. Winter Alaska greeted Mia and Jake Parks with clear skies and frosty air that crunched under their every step. They had flown in from Seattle to spend a weekend among the snow-capped mountains and had long dreamed of taking a photo against the backdrop of the ice hummocks in the Chugach Nature Reserve. Tourist guides had repeatedly warned them that it was dangerous to go out on the ice of the lakes in winter, but the couple decided that if they stayed close to the shore and did not approach the cracks, nothing bad would happen. That day, the temperature rose above normal, and although the surface of the lake seemed completely solid, undercurrents were working under the ice, imperceptibly washing away the layers below, creating areas with dangerously thin thickness. Mia held a new camera, Jake carried a tripod, and joked that for once they would finally take a photo together that would get more likes than their trips to the California coast. They walked out onto the ice, careful to stay close to the hummocks, huge blue boulders that rose from the surface as if the lake had frozen while they were moving. Mia set up the camera and said she wanted a shot where they stood with their backs to the mountains, with only silence and icy immensity around them. Jake walked forward a few meters, checking the light, and Mia took a step to the right to level the composition. The first crack sounded softly, barely audible, and both of them froze. Jake stepped back cautiously and said they should probably go back closer to shore, but Mia was sure they were standing on solid ground. Visually, the ice looked the same everywhere, with no dark spots or fibers that usually signify danger. She lifted her camera for a quick snapshot, and at the same second, a second sound came, a dull, short one, with the flavor of emptiness underfoot. The ice under both of them cracked almost simultaneously. Jake only had time to take one step back before the layer of ice they were standing on collapsed under the weight of their two bodies and plunged them into the icy water. The shock of the cold impact made them both gasp for air, but there was no air under the ice. The water instantly pulled them down, and the sharp edges of the ice prevented them from getting to the surface. Jake still tried to push Mia upward, using his palms to find at least some kind of ledge, but the ice broke under his every move. Within seconds, the current carried them under a solid layer, and the light went out. On the shore, the tourists noticed their backpack and tripod lying on the ice. One of the men went over to check if there was any danger and saw a dark hole that had already begun to tighten with an ice crust. He immediately called the rescuers, but the search in the winter water took a long time. The current pulled the bodies deeper, and only after an hour of hard work did the divers find them under a thick layer of ice. The couple died almost instantly. The cold water stopped their hearts long before anyone could help them. When the rescuers retrieved Mia's camera, the last photo they had of her was of her smiling against a giant hummock, a shot taken just a minute before the ice, which they thought was solid, let them go into the darkness below. The evening Chicago was breathing moisture after a brief rain when 35-year-old IT worker Victor Sloan got off the subway near River North. He often stayed late at work, but this time he wanted to go for a walk and clear his head after a hard day. The city was twinkling with lights, and the clouds floating between the skyscrapers made the landscape look almost cinematic. It was moments like this that he loved to photograph, not professionally, just for himself and his own page, which eventually began to bring him a certain audience. An unfinished skyscraper nearby immediately caught his eye. No guards at the fence, several sliding sections through which he could crawl, and almost complete silence around him. Victor had long known that construction sites are as attractive to photographers as the roofs of old buildings, just a different mood, a different level of risk. He hesitated for a few seconds, but then decided that if he quickly climbed up and took a few shots, no one would know. He crawled through a gap in the fence, pulled up his hood, and started climbing up the concrete steps, where puddles were everywhere due to the rain. The closer he got to the upper floors, the stronger the wind became. On the 40th level, there were no more walls, only bare ceilings, beams, and black space around them. The metal flooring had been dismantled in some places, leaving empty gaps between the slabs. Through them, he could see the city lights flickering far below. Victor climbed even higher, to the 45th floor, where he felt he had the best view of the river and skyscrapers. He walked to the edge of the platforms, where a long steel beam stood next to him, smooth, dark, and wet after the rain. It was from this beam that he wanted to take the shot, a low angle, the city below, and heavy clouds above it. He carefully placed both feet on the beam, trying to keep his balance. The wind was sharp, but he was used to such conditions. He had taken pictures on rooftops before and knew that the main thing was not to make sudden movements. The camera was shaking a bit in his hands, so he decided to take a few seconds to steady his breathing. When he bent down to check the settings, the beam under his foot slipped slightly, either because of a thin water film or wet dust left behind by the workers. Victor instinctively shifted his weight to his left foot to steady himself, but at that moment, a sharp gust of wind hit him from the side, with a force he hadn't expected at this altitude. His center of gravity shifted by a few centimeters, and that was enough. His foot slipped again, his torso lurched forward, and his hands instinctively reached for a handrail that didn't exist. The camera slipped out of his fingers and went down first, leaving a short arc of light from the screen behind. Victor grabbed the edge of the beam for a moment, but the wet surface made it impossible to hold on. He fell down, first in almost complete silence, and then hit the technical level a few floors below. Almost no one heard the sound. Cars were making noise outside, and wind currents dampened any sharp sounds. It was only an hour later that one of the security guards making his rounds noticed a gap in the flooring and a body lying there. He called the rescuers, but they only pronounced him dead. A fall from such a height left no chance. Victor's camera with a broken screen was lying on the concrete nearby. The last unfinished shot was stored on the memory card, the dark sky and the light of skyscrapers, which never became the backdrop for the photo for which he took his last step. The morning sun was slowly rising over the Utah desert landscape as 27-year-old travel blogger Grace Sanders parked her rented SUV off a little-known trail. She had been planning this trip for a long time. She wanted to collect material for a new series of photos about hidden places in the Southwest. One of these places was a sandy arch, almost unknown to tourists, but actively photographed by a narrow circle of travelers. The arch stood over a deep canyon crevice created by erosion, and although it looked monumental, its base consisted of soft sandstone that crumbled every year under the influence of wind and temperature changes. Grace was aware of this, but believed that if she was careful not to stand on the thin edges, there was little risk. She grabbed her backpack, camera, and short tripod and started up the trail. Dry sand crackled under her feet, and the wind that was blowing between the stone walls would sometimes die down and then suddenly increase. The sandy arch appeared in front of her after 40 minutes of walking, a thin, natural arc, like a bridge spanning a canyon. Grace stopped to assess the light and immediately realized that the results would be spectacular. The sun was rising to her left, creating a soft shadow on the inside of the arch, and below, between the rocky fissures, a narrow strip of light shone as if the canyon itself were glowing from within. She set up a tripod a few meters from the edge, turned on the timer, and decided to take a shot of herself sitting on the arch with her side facing the camera. It was supposed to look carefree, beautiful, and a little risky at the same time, just what her followers liked. Grace cautiously approached the arch. The surface was rough, but in some places covered with fine sand that the wind had collected between the ledges. She stood on the center part, where the thickness seemed to be the greatest, and slowly crouched down, trying to feel the stability under her feet. The arch made no sound, but Grace knew that this was no guarantee of safety. Sandstone breaks without warning. Still, the shot was too good to pass up. She turned to the camera, preparing for the first shot. At that moment, the wind changed direction, and a thin strip of sand flew off the surface of the arch, hitting her in the face. She covered her eyes with her palm and instinctively moved back a little, just a few centimeters. This movement was fatal. Under her weight, the sandy ledge, imperceptibly eroded by erosion, suddenly cracked. At first it was light, almost silent, as if only a small piece had broken off, but the next moment, the entire edge collapsed beneath her. Grace went flying down with the debris, not having time to scream or grab onto anything. The fall was swift. The narrow canyon crevice pulled her in so that no body could turn around or slow down. The impact on the stone floor was instantaneous. Only the tripod and the camera remained on the surface, and they continued to work, counting down the seconds until the next automatic shot, which showed the arch already deserted. The rescuers were called by a man who was walking along a path nearby and heard the sound of a fall, a dull, short one, as if a stone had fallen into a deep mine. He approached the edge of the canyon, but could see nothing but a dark crack below. The search and rescue team arrived an hour later, but the descent into the crevasse required special equipment. When they reached the fall site, Grace was no longer showing signs of life. Her camera, which was found on the surface, preserved the last shot of the series. The arch, the sky, and the empty space where a second before the tragedy, a person was sitting who only wanted to take a beautiful photo. These stories remind us that sometimes one step for a beautiful shot can be the last. A risk that seems insignificant can turn into a tragedy in a matter of seconds. No photo is worth the loss of life. If you liked this episode, please subscribe and like it. It helps to develop the channel. Thank you for watching.